Book 1, Chapter 4, Part 4 of History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ben Wilford. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 1, by Henry Charles LEA. Book 1, Chapter 4, Establishment of the Inquisition, Part 4. Torquemada's commission of 1485 contained the important power of appointing and dismissing inquisitors, but the confirmation of 1486 bore the significant exception that all those appointed by the Pope were exempted from removal by him, indicating that in the interval he had attempted to exercise the power, and that the resistance to it had enlisted papal support. In fact, at the Conference of Seville, held in 1484 by Torquemada, there were present the two inquisitors of each of four existing tribunals. From Seville we find Juan de San Martin, one of the original appointees of 1479, but his colleague Miguel de Murillo has disappeared and is replaced by Juan Ruiz de Media, who had been merely assessor, while but a single one, Pero Martinez de Barrio, of the seven commissioned by Sixtus IV in 1482, appears as representing the other tribunals. The rest are all new men, doubtless appointees of Torquemada. There was evidently a bitter quarrel on foot between Torquemada and the original papal nominees, who held that their powers, delegated directly from the Pope, rendered them independent of him, and, as usual, the Holy See inclined to one side or to the other in the most exasperating manner as the opposing interests brought influence to bear. Complaints against Torquemada were sufficiently numerous and serious to oblige him thrice to send Fray Alonso Valaja to the papal court to justify him. He seems to have removed Miguel de Murillo, who vindicated himself in Rome, for a brief of Innocent VIII, February 23, 1487, appoints him Inquisitor of Seville, in complete disregard of the faculties granted to Torquemada. Then a motu proprio of November 26, 1487, suspends both him and Juan de San Martin and commissions Torquemada to appoint their successors. Again, a brief of January 7, 1488, appoints Juan Inquisitor of Seville, while subsequent briefs of the same year are addressed to him concerning the business of his office as though he were discharging its duties independently of Torquemada, but his death in 1489 removed him from the scene. The quarrel evidently continued, and at one time Fray Miguel enjoyed a momentary triumph, for a papal letter of September 26, 1491, commissions him as Inquisitor-General of Castile and Aragon, thus placing him on an equality with Torquemada himself. It would be impossible now to determine what part the sovereigns may have had in these changes, and to what extent the popes disregarded the authority conferred on them of appointment and removal. There was a constant struggle on the one hand to render the Spanish Holy Office national and independent, and on the other to keep it subject to papal control. Finally, the opposition to Torquemada became so strong that Alexander VI, in 1494, kindly alleging his great age and infirmities, commissioned Martin Ponce de Leon, Archbishop of Messina, but resident in Spain, Inigo Manrique, Bishop of Cordova, Francisco Sanchez de la Fuentes, Bishop of Avila, Alonso Suarez de Fuentealbas, Bishop of Montenegro, and successively of Lugo and Jaén, as Inquisitor-General, with the same powers as Torquemada. Each was independent and could act by himself, and could even terminate cases commenced by another. It is quite probable that, to spare his feelings, he was allowed to name his colleagues as delegates of his powers, for in some instructions issued in 1494 by Martin of Messina and Francisco of Avila, they described themselves as Inquisitors-General in all the Spanish realms subdelegated by the Inquisitor-General Torquemada. He evidently still retained his preeminence and was active to the last, for we have letters from Ferdinand to him in the first half of 1498 concerning the current affairs of the Inquisition, in which the Bishop of Lugo declined to interfere with him. The instructions of Avila in 1498 were issued in his name as Inquisitor-General, and the assertion that he resigned 2 years before his death, September 16, 1498, is evidently incorrect. In some respects, however, the Bishop of Avila had special functions which distinguished him from his colleagues, for he was appointed by Alexander VI, November 4, 1494, judge of appeals in all matters of faith, and March 30, 1495, he received special faculties to degrade ecclesiastics condemned by the Inquisition or to appoint other bishops for that function. So long as they were in orders, clerics were exempt from secular jurisdiction, and it was necessary to degrade them before they could be delivered to the civil authorities for burning. Under the canons, this had to be done by their own bishops, who were not always at hand for the purpose, and who apparently, when present, sometimes refused or delayed to perform the office, which was a serious impediment to the business of the Inquisition, as many Judaizing conversos were found among the clerics. This multiform headship of the Inquisition continued for some years until the various incumbents successively died or resigned. Inigo Manrique was the first to disappear, dying in 1496 and had no successor. Then, in 1498, followed the Bishop of Avila, who had been transferred to Cordova in 1496. In the same year, as we had seen, Torquemada died, and this time the vacancy was filled by the appointment as his successor of Diego de, then Bishop of Jaen, subsequently in 1500 of Palencia, and in 1505 Archbishop of Seville, who was commissioned November 24, 1498, for the Castile, Leon, and Granada, and on September 1, 1499, for all the Spanish kingdoms. In 1500 died Martin, Archbishop of Messina, apparently a defaulter, for on October 26 of the same year Ferdinand orders his auditor of the confiscations to pass to the accounts of Luis de Riva Martin, receiver of Cadiz, 18,000 maravedis due by the archbishop for wheat, hay, etc., which he forgives to their heirs. From this time forward, Dizay is recognized as the sole Inquisitor-General and direct successor of Torquemada, but Fuentesal's Bishop of Jaen remained in office for as late as January 13, 1503. An order for the payment of salaries is signed by Dizay and contains the names of the Bishop of Jaen, as also Inquisitor-General. He relinquished the position in 1504, and Dizay remained as sole chief of the Inquisition until, in 1507, he was forced to resign, as we shall see hereafter. At the time of his retirement the kingdom of Castile and Aragon had been separated by the death of Isabella, November 26, 1504. Ferdinand's experience with his son-in-law, Philip I, and his hope of issue from his marriage in March 1506 with Germaine de Foix, in which case the kingdoms would have remained separate, warned him of the danger of having his ancestral dominions spiritually subordinated to a Castilian subject. Before Dizay's resignation, therefore, he applied to Julius II to commission Juan Enguerra, Bishop of Vich, with the powers for Aragon which Dizay was exercising. Julius seems to have made some difficulty about this, for a letter of Ferdinand from Naples, February 6, 1507, to his ambassador at Rome, Francisco de Rojas, instructs him to explain that, since he had abandoned the title of King of Castile, the jurisdiction was separated, and it was necessary and convenient that there should be an inquisition for each kingdom. He prevailed, and the appointments of Cardinals Ximenes for Castile and of Bishop Enguerra for Aragon were issued respectively on June 6 and 5, 1507. During the lifetime of Ximenes, the Inquisitions remained disunited, but in 1518, after his death, Charles V caused his former tutor, Cardinal Adrian Utrecht, Bishop of Tortosa, who in 1516 had been made Inquisitor-General of Aragon, to be commissioned also of Castile, after which there was no further division. During the interval Ferdinand had acquired Navarra and had annexed it to the crown of Castile, so that the whole of the peninsula, with the exception of Portugal, was united under one organization. Among other powers granted to Torquemada was that of modifying the rules of the Inquisition to adapt them to the requirements of Spain. The importance of this concession it would be difficult to exaggerate, as it rendered the institution virtually self-governing. Thus the Spanish Inquisitions acquired a character of its own, distinguishing it from moribund tribunals of the peers in other lands. The men who fashioned it knew perfectly what they wanted, and in their hands it assumed the shape in which it dominated the conscience of every man and was an object of terror to the whole population. In the exercise of this power Torquemada assembled the Inquisitors in Seville, November 29, 1484, where, in conjunction with his colleagues of the Suprema, a series of regulations was agreed upon, known as the Instrucciones de Sevilla, to which in December of the same year, in January 1485, he added further rules, issued in his own name under the authority of the sovereigns. In 1488 another assembly was held, under the supervision of Ferdinand and Isabella, which issued the Instrucciones de Valladolid. In 1498 came the Instrucciones de Avila, the last in which Torquemada took part, designed principally to check the abuses which were rapidly developing, and for the same purpose a brief addition was made at Seville in 1500 by Diego de Zay. All of these became known in the tribunals as the Instrucciones Antiguas. As the institution became thoroughly organized under the control of the Suprema, consultation with the subordinate inquisitors was no longer requisite, and regulations were promulgated by it in Cartas Acordadas. It was difficult, however, to keep the inquisitors strictly in line, and variations of practice sprang up which, in 1561, the Inquisitor-General, Fernando Valdez, endeavored to check by issuing the Instrucciones Nuevas. Subsequent regulations were required from time to time, forming a considerable and somewhat intricate body of jurisprudence which we shall have to consider hereafter. At present it is sufficient to indicate how the Inquisition became an autonomous body, an imperium in imperio, framing its own laws and subject only to the rarely exercised authority of the Holy See and the more or less hesitating control of the crown. At the same time all the resources of the state were placed at its disposal. When an inquisitor came to assume his functions, the officials took an oath to assist him, to exterminate all whom he might designate as heretics, and to observe and compel the observance of all the decretals, ad obolinum, excommunicamus, ut officium inquisitonis, and ut inquisitonis negotium. The papal legislations of the 13th century, which made the state wholly subservient to the Holy Office, and rendered incapable of official position any one suspect in the faith or who favored heretics. Besides this, all the population was assembled to listen to a sermon by the inquisitor, after which all were required to swear on the cross and the Gospels to help the Holy Office and not to impede it in any manner or on any pretext. It is no wonder that, as this portentous institution spread its wings of terror over the land, all who felt themselves liable to its animadversion were disposed to seek safety in flight, no matter at what sacrifice. That numbers succeeded in this is shown by the statistics of the early autos de fe, in which the living victims are far outnumbered by the effigies of the absent. Thus in Ciudad Real, during the first 2 years, 52 obstinate heretics were burnt and 220 absentees were condemned. In Barcelona, where the Inquisition was not established until 1487, their first auto de fe, celebrated January 25, 1488, showed a list of 4 living victims to 12 effigies of fugitives. In a subsequent one of May 23, the proportions were 3 to 42. In one of February 9, 1489, 3 to 39. In one of March 24, 1490, they were 2 to 159, and in another of June 10, 1491, they were 3 to 139. If the object had simply been to purify the land of heresy and apostasy, this would have been accomplished as well by expatriation as by burning or reconciling. But such was not the policy which governed the sovereigns, and edicts were issued forbidding all of the Jewish lineage from leaving Spain and imposing a fine of 500 florins on shipmasters conveying them away. This was not, as it might seem to us, wanton cruelty, although it was harsh, inasmuch as it assumed guilt on mere suspicion. To say nothing of the confiscations, which were defrauded of the portable property carried away by the fugitives, we must bear in mind that, to the orthodox of the period, heresy was a positive crime, nay, the greatest of crimes, punishable as such by laws in force for centuries, and the heretic was to be prevented from escaping its penalties as much as a murderer or a thief. The royal edicts were supplemented by the Inquisition, and it is an illustration of the extension of its jurisdiction over all matters relating directly or indirectly to the faith that, November 8, 1499, the Archbishop Martin of Messina issued an order which was published throughout the realm and was confirmed by Diego de Say, January 15, 1502, to the effect that no ship captain or merchant should transport across seas any new Christian, whether Jewish or Moorish, without a royal license, upon pain of confiscation, of excommunication, and of being held as a fautor and protector of heretics. To render this effective, 2 days later Archbishop Martin ordered that suitable persons should be sent to all the seaports to arrest all new Christians desiring to cross the sea, and bring them to the Inquisition so that justice could be done to them, all expenses being defrayed out of the confiscations. These provisions were not allowed to be dead letter, though we are apt to hear of them rather in cases where, for special reasons, the penalties were remitted. Thus, July 24, 1499, Ferdinand writes to the Inquisitors of Barcelona that a ship of Charles de Saint Clement, a merchant of their city, had brought from Alexandria to Agasmotis certain persons who had fled from Spain. Even this transportation between foreign ports came within the purview of the law, for Ferdinand explains that action in this case would be to his disservice. Wherefore, if complaint is lodged with them, they are to refer it to him or to the Inquisitor-General for instructions. Again, on November 8, 1500, the king orders the release of the caravel and other property of Diego de la Mesquita of Seville, which has been seized because he had carried some new Christians to Naples. The reason for the release being the services of Diego in the war with Naples and those which he is rendering elsewhere. A letter from Ferdinand to the King of Portugal, November 7, 1500, recites that recently some new Christians had been arrested in Malaga, where they were embarking under pretext of going to Rome for the Jubilee. On examination by the Inquisition at Seville, they admitted that they were Jews, but said that they had been forced in Portugal to turn Christian. As this brought them under inquisitorial jurisdiction, the inquisitors were sending to Portugal for evidence, and the king was asked to protect the envoys and give them facilities for the purpose. The same determination was manifested to recapture, when possible, those who had succeeded in effecting their flight. In 1496, Messer Martin, Inquisitor of Majorca, heard of some who were in Bugia, a seaport of Africa. He forthwith dispatched the notary, Lope de Vergara, thither to seize them, but the misbehaving Moors disregarded his safe conduct, and threw him and his party into a dungeon, where they languished for 3 years. He at length was ransomed, and in recompense of his losses and suffering, Ferdinand ordered, March 31, 1499, Mateo de Morano, receiver of Majorca, to pay him 250 gold ducats, without requiring of him any itemized statement of his injuries. It shows how strong an impression had already been made by the resolute character of the sovereigns, and how violent was the antagonism generally entertained for the Conversos, that so novel and absolute a tyranny could be imposed on the lately turbulent population of Castile without resistance, and that so powerful a class as that against which persecution was directed should have submitted without an effort save the abortive plots at Seville and Toledo. The indications that had reached us of opposition to the arbitrary acts of the Inquisition in making arrests or confiscations are singularly few. In the records of the town council of Xeres de la Frontera, under date of August 28, 1482, there is an entry reciting that there had come to the town a man carrying a wand, and calling himself an alguazil of the Inquisition. He had seized Goncalo Cacab, and carried him off without showing his authority to the local officials, which was characterized as an atrocious proceeding, and the town ought to take steps with the king, the pope, and the Inquisition to have it undone. Doubtless the summary acts of the Holy Office, overriding all recognized laws, created such feeling in many places, as we may gather from the cedula of Ferdinand, December 15, 1484, forbidding the reception of heretics and ordering their surrender on demand of the inquisitors, and another of July 8, 1487, commanding that any one bearing orders from the inquisitors of Toledo is to be allowed to arrest any person under a penalty of 100,000 maravedis for the rich and confiscation for others. But complaints were dangerous, for they could be met by threats of punishment for faltership of heresy. Still it required considerable time to accustom the nobles and people to unquestioning submission to a domination so absolute and so foreign to their experience. As late as the year 1500, there are two royal letters to the Count of Benalcazar, reciting that he had ordered the arrest of a girl of Herrera, who had uttered scandals against the faith. She was in the hands of his alcaide, Gutierre de Sotomayor, who refused to deliver her when the inquisitors sent for her. The second letter, after an interval of 19 days, points out the gravity of the offense, and peremptorily orders the surrender of the girl. She proved to be a Jewish prophetess, whose trial resulted in bringing to the stake large numbers of her unfortunate disciples. There is also an anticipation of resistance in a letter, January 12, 1501, to the prior of St. John, charging him to see that no impediments are placed in the way of the receiver of the Inquisition of Jaén in seizing certain confiscated property at Alcázar de Consuegra. More indicative of popular repugnance is a letter of October 4, 1502, to the royal officials of a place not specified, reciting that the people are endeavoring to have Mosen Salvador Sierras, lieutenant of the Vicar, removed because he had spoken well of the Inquisition, and had been charged by the inquisitors with certain duties to perform. They are not to allow this to be done, and are to see that he is not ill-treated. In 1509, Ferdinand had occasion to remonstrate with the Duke of Alva, in the case of Alonso de Jaén, a resident of Coria, because, when he was arrested, an agent of the Duke had seized certain cows and sold them, and, when he was condemned and his property confiscated, Alva had forbidden any one to purchase anything without his permission. Ferdinand charges him to allow the sale to proceed freely and to account for the cows, pointing out that he had granted to him a third of the net proceeds of all confiscations in his estates. This grant of a third of the confiscations was made to other great nobles, and doubtless tended to reconcile them to the operations of the Inquisition. In this general acquiescence, it is somewhat remarkable that, as late as 1520, when Charles V ordered Merida to prepare accommodations for a tribunal, the city remonstrated. Everything there was quiet and peaceful, it said, and it feared a tumult if the Holy Office was established there, while if merely a visit was made for an inquest it would lend willing aid. Cardinal Adrian hearkened to the warning in Charles' absence, and in a letter of November 27, 1520, ordered his inquisitors to settle somewhere else. At the same time it was inevitable that power so irresponsible would be frequently and greatly abused, and it is interesting to observe that, when no resistance was made, Ferdinand was, as a general rule, prompt to intervene in favor of the oppressed. Thus, January 28, 1498, he writes to the Inquisitors-General that recently some officials of the Inquisition of Valencia went to the barony of Serra to arrest some women who wore Moorish dress, and, as they were not recognized, they were resisted by the Moors, whereupon the inquisitors proceeded to seize all the Moors of Serra who chanced to come to Valencia, so that the place was becoming depopulated. He therefore orders the Inquisitors-General to intimate to their subordinates that they must find some other method whereby the innocent shall not suffer for the fault of the individuals, and, not content with this, he wrote directly to the Inquisitor of Valencia, instructing him to proceed with much moderation. In another case where opposition had been provoked he writes, January 18, 1499, "We have your letter and are much displeased with the maltreatment which you report of the Inquisitor and his officials. It will be attended to duly, but often you yourself are the cause of it, for if each of you would attend to his duties quietly and carefully and injure no one, you would be held in good esteem. Look at this in the future, for it will displease us much if you do what you ought not, with little foundation." At the same time he charges the Inquisitor not to make arrests without good cause. "For in such things, besides the charge on your conscience, the Holy Office is much defamed and its officials despised." So in a letter of August 15, 1500, to the Inquisitors of Saragossa, he tells them that he has received a copy of an edict which they had issued at Calatayud. It is so sharp that if it is enforced no one can be safe. They must consider such things carefully or consult him. In the present case they will obey the instructions sent by the Inquisitor-Generals, and must always bear in mind that the only object of the Inquisition is the salvation of the souls. Again, when the Inquisitors of Barcelona imperiously placed the town of Perpinan under interdict, in a quarrel arising out of a censal or a ground rent on Carcella, Ferdinand writes to them, March 5, 1501, that the town is poor and must be gently treated, especially as it is on the frontier, and he sends a special envoy to arrange the matter. The wearing delays, which were one of the most terrible engines of the oppression by the Inquisition, were especially distasteful to him. January 28, 1498, he writes to an inquisitor about the case of Anton Ruiz of Teruel, who had been imprisoned for 5 months without trial for some remarks made by him to another person about the confiscation of the property of Jaime de Santangel. Though application had been made repeatedly to have the case dispatched, Ferdinand orders that it be considered at once. The prisoner is either to be discharged on bail, or proper punishment is to be inflicted. So, January 16, 1501, he reminds inquisitors that he has written to them several times to conclude the case between the heirs of Mosin Perea and the sons of Anton Ruiz, and deliver sentence. The case has been concluded for some time, but the sentence is withheld. It must be rendered at once, or the case must be either delegated to a competent person or be sent to the Suprema. At the same time, whenever there was semblance of opposition to an injustice on the part of the secular authorities, he was prompt to repress it. The action of the Inquisition of Valencia in confiscating the property of a certain Valenzuela excited so much feeling that the governor, the auditor general, the royal council, and the jurados met to protest against it, and in so doing said some things unpleasing to the inquisitors, who thereupon complained to Ferdinand. He wrote to the offenders, March 21, 1499, rebuking them severely. It was none of their business. If the inquisitors committed an injustice, the appeal lay in the Inquisitor-General, who would rectify it. Their duty was to aid the Inquisition, and he ordered them to do so in future and not create scandal. He was more considerate when the frontier town of Perpinan was concerned, for in 1513, when the deputy receiver of confiscations provoked antagonism by the vigor of his proceedings, and the consuls complained that he had publicly insulted Franco Maler, one of their number, Ferdinand ordered the Inquisitor of Barcelona to investigate the matter at once and to inflict due punishment. His whole correspondence shows the untiring interest which he felt in the institution, not merely as a financial or political instrument, but as a means of defending and advancing the faith. He was sincerely bigoted and, when he had witnessed an auto de fe in Valladolid, he wrote, September 30, 1509, to the Inquisitor Juan Alonso de Navia to express the great pleasure which it had given him as a means of advancing the honor and glory of God and the exaltation of the Holy Catholic faith. Inquisitors were in the habit of sending him reports of the autos celebrated by them, to which he would reply in terms of high satisfaction, urging them to increase zeal. On one occasion, in 1512, and on another in 1513, he was so much pleased that he made a present to the Inquisitor of 200 ducats, and ordered 15 ducats to be given to the messenger. End of Book 1, Chapter 4, Part 4. Recording by Ben Wilford.